Greetings, this is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my series on the forgotten collectible card games of the past. We're continuing talking about Spellfire. Today I'm going to start talking to you about the rules of Spellfire and how to play the game. I'm going to have a couple of episodes on doing that, and we'll see if I want to talk about some of the cards and sets that were out there afterwards. Try to finish up this small series. But let's talk about those rules. I'm going to be talking to you about the 4th edition rules. This was the last edition of the rules that came out and the final one that existed. So this is going to have all the kind of clarifications that existed from the earlier editions of it and any kind of small changes that occurred during that time. So Spellfire was a game that's built for at least 2 players, but it's built in such a way that it can accommodate any number of players very easily without any changes to the rules. Now each player, the object of the game of course is to build an empire. They have their own decks, each of their own decks, that they're attempting to use in order to build this empire. The idea of building an empire is each player takes turns and plays out realm cards building their empire. Also, there is the possibility that on an opponent's turn, they can attack or defend. Anybody can attack or defend these empires, effectively. So on my turn, I could attack an opponent. On my opponent's turn, they could attack and I could defend. You use champions to, of course, both attack and defend, and you enhance those champions with spells, magic items, artifacts, and other special cards, making them more powerful or more able to withstand the attacks of your opponents, or to attack your opponents and deal more damage. Once that an attack is successful, it will either destroy a champion, removing it from play, or raise one of their realms. A raised realm is a term that's going to come up a lot. Raising just means that it is destroyed, not removed from play necessarily at this point in time, but we'll talk about being raised a little later. Now the object, of course, is to have fun, to not be very rules lawyery, not to push it. It's to have a good game and be enjoyable. Now let's talk about the types of cards. First is the sideway cards. These are your realms. They're going to be represented by some kind of map upon these pictures. You're going to, of course, play them out sideways and build your empire using them. The other types of cards, all other types of cards, are upright, and they represent everything else. Now, there's a symbol in the top corner of them representing what type of card it is. Effectively, though, there are certain ones that use the same symbols. Things like wizards and wizard spells will use the same symbol, but be a different color. One of them is going to represent your champion wizards, the other is going to represent your spells that are wizard spells. The same could be said for both clerics and psionicists. Psionicists will also have their own symbol with its own color, and psionicist powers will have the same. And as I said, clerics and cleric spells also function the exact same way. Now there are 7 symbols that could appear on champion cards. These include, of course, cleric, hero, monster, wizard, thief, regent, and psionicist. Any of these 7 symbols will appear in the top corner of a champion card and will represent it being a champion. Most champions will have a level representing how powerful it is from 0 to 9. There are exceptions that can be above there, but traditionally most of them will be from 0 to 9. It represents how much power it's bringing to the table in attacking or defending. Now the bottom of each card will have a little box. The first thing you might see in that box is, of course, it will have a campaign setting listed in there. This applies to champions, artifacts, realms, and holdings that it will tell you the unique setting that it was from, whether it be something like Dark Sun or just basic AD&D or Forgotten Realms, it will mention it here. Any special powers that this card might have will also be listed in this area. These special powers would go beyond the traditional rules and be an exception to them, kind of varying differently from what the normal rules of the game would be. Now the standard deck of Spellfire is 55 cards. Now a deck must have 8 to 15 realms within it to be legal. Again, you can have any number of those, but you must have within those range. You must have between 1 and 20 champions, 20 being the maximum number of champions. You actually have to have a minimum of 1. The total level of all your champions added to that together cannot be more than 90. So though you might have 20 champions in it, their total level cannot add up to being more than 90. You can also have a maximum number of 10 artifacts, 12 magic items, 10 event cards, 5 holding cards, and 3 special rules cards. Any other type of card that you might have, you can have any number of, you are not limited by it. But those types of cards are limited in your deck. And again, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have a 55 card deck. That is the standard deck size. It is also important to note that you may have only one of a type of card in your deck at a time. So that means whatever card I would have, I may only have one copy of it in my deck. Now, when players are starting a game, they agree upon any optional rules they might be using, and then they start by drawing a random card from their deck. The final number in the collector's number of it, the final number, not like if it's like 27, the 7 and what it is compared between the two of them, and the higher number player goes first. Both players shuffle their decks together, and they use that as their draw pile, which they'll be drawing their entire deck in a game from. Each person, again, is going to have their own deck that they're going to be drawing from. Each player starts by drawing a starting hand of 5 cards. At the start of their turn, they will draw 3 cards, and play will go clockwise around the board, each player drawing 3 cards at the beginning of their turn. Now, there's a very important optional rule for mulliganing. This means that effectively, at the beginning of your second turn, if you did not have a realm card, you can choose to mulligan the game. The entire game would be over, there would be no winners or losers, effectively everything would restart once again. It really boils down to on your first turn, let's say I'm trying to mulligan, I didn't get a realm. On my second turn, I didn't draw a realm, so I have not drawn a realm for each of my turns. I didn't have one in my starting hand. I have no events which allow me to search for a realm. If all these qualify, that I then show my hand to my opponent and be like, no realms, we mulligan the game. So effectively, if by the end of my second turn, I couldn't have played a realm no matter what, we can mulligan. Now, there is also an exception to this. If something should have forced me, like an event or another card, to discard a realm from my hand, I still would qualify. So if on my first turn, my opponent forced me to discard a realm, so I didn't have one, and on the beginning of my second turn, I knew I couldn't get one by the end of my turn, I could still mulligan it there. So it does sort of make it that your opponent might not necessarily want to force you to discard a realm, but it's usually something that's helpful for them, so they're going to do it. Now, the only thing is, the same player can only mulligan twice in a row. After that, you're out of luck. You can't do a third time in a row. Granted, if another opponent does the mulligan, you might get lucky then. But effectively, it's like you in a row, you can only do 2. And if then, you just have to play with what you have and hope for the best. Now, there is an important rule that I have to talk about. For each champion, artifact, realm, or holding, you can only have one in play at a time, regardless of all the players that are playing the game. Which means, if I would have a certain realm out, no one else in the game can play that realm as long as I have that realm out, or as long as I have that champion out, or as long as I have that artifact out that I've played it. This prevents the other people from having it. It is a unique exception that each of these things is a unique card that can be out in play. This does mean that it can limit things that are out in play. Raised realms still count as being out in play for the exception of this rule. As soon as they would be discarded from play, or anything would be discarded in play, it would open it up for someone else that might have this champion, artifact, realm, or holding in their hand to play it then and replace what you had just lost. So that's it for today. I introduced you to the basics of Spellfire. I told you about the basics of how your turns go in the game, how to mulligan, how to begin your game, how to build your deck, what kind of things you're going to have in your deck. I only talked a little bit about the types of cards. I'm going to, of course, go into those in more depth in future episodes. But for now, in the next episode, I'm going to talk about gameplay and the phases of the turn that you're going to be taking, kind of diving into the actual meat of the game of Spellfire and describing to you a little bit more of how to play the game and enjoy it. So if you have questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link to the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.